I'll just say as I begin these remarks, I had no idea there was a baptism today, and you'll see that the Spirit is moving. Tell out my soul. When I heard the theme of this year's stewardship campaign, Tell Out My Soul, I felt an immediate affinity. Tell Out My Soul, the Greatness of the Lord, is one of my favorite hymns. It's one with a very special association for me because it was one of the hymns that we chose for my oldest daughter, Katie's baptism. My late husband was the organist. That's how we got to choose the hymns. I don't know whether this is true for most of you, but for the baptisms of each of my daughters, there were certain freeze-frame moments that stood outside of time. In the case of Katie, she was born when we lived in Exeter, England, and our parish church, St. Andrew's, in a small village called Ken, just outside Exeter, had been built in the 14th century. That was impressive, but the baptismal font was actually from the previous building. It was a 12th century font. So it was quite something to have our child baptized in a font that almost for a millennium had seen thousands of such ceremonies, creating a sense of extraordinary continuity of families of faith as we made those promises on behalf of our child. And she was anointed with the sacrament of baptism. Tell out my soul the greatness of the Lord, unnumbered mercies give my spirit voice. Stay with me for a moment as I make what is a connection from that moment to now, not just today's baptism. That baby that we baptized back in 1989 herself had a baby last March, making me a grandmother. As I imagine and begin to live into my role as a grandmother, my own grandmothers and the very special relationship I enjoyed with them are close in my thoughts. My dad's parents lived less than a mile away from us, and my three brothers and I spent every Saturday night at their house. I marvel now, date night for my parents every Saturday night. My grandmother was a woman of deep and abiding faith. She and my grandfather came from nothing. Hardscrabble was quite literal as they and their 11 and 12 siblings, respectively, grew up sharecropping cotton. My grandparents lived on the oil fields in a tent in the early years of their marriage. Whether because of or in spite of that hard life, they had an extraordinary belief in giving back to God that played out in our lives as kids in this way. Part of the Saturday night routine of spending the night at my grandparents' was that we received our allowance. Unlike the allowance at my home, which was a highly contested affair about whether I and my brothers had or had not done our required chores, at my grandparents' the allowance came with no strings. We received it regardless of how well or how poorly we'd behaved, or whatever we had or we hadn't done. It came with no strings, but it did come with an expectation. The $1 allowance was given to us as 3/4, 2 dimes, and a nickel. Part of that, I'm sure, was my grandfather's small business insistence that you needed to know how to add and how to count change. But mostly, it made easy the requirement that 10% off the top went to God. So a dime was set aside every Saturday night to go to church the next day before the allowance ever made it into my allowance jar. It was never a subject of negotiation or even discussion as far as I remember, but what I do remember proudly as a small child was putting my envelope with that dime in the plate each Sunday. When I look back on it, I recognize what a profound lesson it was. The allowance was given unconditionally. I'd done nothing to earn it beyond simply being a beloved grandchild. And giving 10% to the church before even thinking of the money as mine avoided the kind of giving of what was left over, or if there was enough, or I'll do it next week, or when I get in a better place. While it took quite a while in my life to apply that lesson to my own giving, it's what for me makes stewardship fundamentally different from what we usually call charitable giving. Several people who've given these talks have mentioned it's hard to ask for money. As most of you know, I'm a college president. All I do is ask for money. So I don't have any trouble doing that. But that's not what I'm actually standing up here to do. Well, yes, this is about money, and Christ Church will accept your gifts by cash or by check, weekly or monthly or online, or as appreciated securities, or as donor-advised funds, or almost anything you want to give. And like any other charitable donation, your gift is tax deductible. And while, like any other nonprofit, we plan our budget based on what you pledge, which is what the vestry will do in a couple of weeks as we set our budget for next year. Stewardship is fundamentally different in this way. It's asking us to recognize what God has given us, not because of anything we've done, or haven't done, or will do, and not with any conditions about what we do with it, but because we are beloved, because we are loved unconditionally. And in response, we acknowledge that the unnumbered, indeed impossible to number mercies of God's love, to give back to God through the church and the ministry we're called to here. So for me today, tell out my soul the greatness of the Lord, and God my Savior shall my heart rejoice. Or when we sing this hymn in a moment, that verse, tell out my soul the greatness of his might. Powers and dominions lay their glory by, and especially for this moment in our world, proud hearts and stubborn wills are put to flight, the hungry fed, the humble lifted high. This is what we are called to. I hope for you as we sing this joyful paraphrase of the Magnificat today, as we bring our pledges forward, as we dedicate these gifts to God, is that you will have your own stories to tell of God's grace and greatness in your life. And as the hymn says, tell out my soul the greatness of the Lord to children's children and forevermore.